Hi folks, Rob Poyton here. Thanks for joining me on today's Innsmouth excursion, and we're down in Devon again actually. Yes, we're on our annual visit to Plymouth, and I think this is possibly the third Innsmouth excursion I filmed in Plymouth. Of course, I did a piece on the Barbican in the town itself, and then last time we were up at Buckfastleigh at the Holy Trinity Church, which is I think the creepiest site I've been to in these excursions. That of course is the resting place of Squire Cabell. Well, I say resting place because he seemed just as active in death as he was in life, roaming the moors with his spectral hound, which, so the story goes, was a main inspiration for Conan Doyle's Hound of the Baskervilles. Today, however, we're a few miles west of Buckfastleigh at a place called Buckland Abbey. Originally a Cistercian monastery, it was founded in 1278. In the 15th century they built a huge tithe barn here as well, more about that in a moment. And of course it was shut down as part of Henry VIII's dissolution of the monasteries in 1539. In 1541 it was sold to a chap called Richard Grenville, and his grandson, also called Richard Grenville, sold it, unknowingly it turns out, to Sir Francis Drake. And Drake, who lived here for 15 years, well, that's the main sort of paranormal legend or myth, if you like, about the house, is the legend of Drake's drum. Now, Grenville and Drake, of course, are well-known figures in British history, but if you're a Robert E. Howard fan, I'm sure they will also be familiar to you from his Solomon Kane stories, or stories and poems. And I can think of, well, the Return of Sir Richard Grenville and One Dark Stain in particular, two excellent poems that feature those characters. However, before we go and have a look around the house itself, we're going to go into that tithe barn that I mentioned earlier. It's a huge structure, and they've got a special exhibition on here at the moment, which is, well, I think it's called like a Viking Christmas. Sounds intriguing? Let's go and have a look. Now, I never really knew that the Vikings were in Devon. I'm very familiar with their exploits in the east of England, of course, where I live. But yeah, they turned up here in 997 and established a camp in Exmouth. And there were a few battles and raids and that sort of thing going on. So what we have here, it's the year 997. And this lovely old medieval barn has been set up to represent a Yuletide festival. So as we go in through the large doors here, we have a sort of northern forest set up. And you start to get some idea of the size of this building as well. It's quite incredible. And here we have the Great Hall with the central table all set up ready for the feast. I like these little fleeces on the bench as well, you know, because you don't want a numb bum, do you? If you're sitting there for a couple of hours feasting, there's the king. Doesn't he look regal? Chief of the Vikings. And then at the bottom we have this, I guess you'd call it a grove. And this is representative of a sacred grove to Odin. And we've got these lovely carved figures here. I guess that's Odin himself there with the one eye. So yeah, a really excellent display, very atmospheric. And again, as the camera pans around here, you'll get some idea of the dimensions of this medieval barn. It's an incredible structure, particularly the roof there. Coming out of the barn then, we first see the Abbey building itself. As I mentioned, this was established as a Cistercian monastery in 1278. Henry VIII took it over in 1539 with the dissolution, and it was sold to Sir Richard Grenville in 1541. He didn't really live here though, he passed it to his son Roger. However, he didn't really get to live here either that much, because he unfortunately drowned in the Mary Rose tragedy, the ship that sank off of Portsmouth in 1545. So from there it passed to Roger's son, also called Sir Richard Grenville, who inherited the estate from his grandfather when he was just 21. And it was Richard who began modifying the abbey, pulling down a lot of the monastery buildings and converting the main church into a Tudor mansion. That's quite a conversion, right? In 1581, Sir Richard sold the house, unbeknownst to him, because the sale all went through intermediaries. The buyer was Sir Francis Drake, and the two were bitter rivals apparently, so I imagined Sir Richard was none too pleased when he found out. Now, Francis Drake, of course, very famous Elizabethan, sea captain, privateer, pirate, and also, of course, we have to remember, slave trader as well. First Englishman to circumnavigate the globe in the Golden Hind, and he was able to purchase Buckland Abbey using a fraction of the treasure from the voyage. For treasure, read plunder, stuff that he'd nicked basically, I imagine. When he died in 1596, he didn't have any children, so ownership of Buckland Abbey passed to his brother Thomas Drake, and the abbey actually remained in the ownership of the Drake family and their descendants until 1946, when the National Trust took it over. That's quite remarkable. It remained in that family for all those hundreds of years. So as you come into the abbey and look at this downstairs room and then move to upstairs, there are lots of, I guess, what we'd call Drakean relics and pictures. There's pictures here of the Battle of the Spanish Armada, and there's flags from various ships. There's suits of armour and all sorts of interesting things to look at. But the main thing we're going to talk about today is this item, Drake's drum, and the legend of Drake's drum. Now, what we have here is just a model, because I did think when I first saw this, blimey, that's a bit small even for a snare drum. So this is a model of the drum, which I believe is kept in the Box Museum in Plymouth. I'm not sure if they have the original there on display or if it's a replica. But anyway, the legend goes that this was the snare drum that Drake had with him on the Golden Hind when he did that round the world trip. That took place between 1577 and 1580. Now, in 1596, Drake caught a fever and was on his deathbed. At the time, he was off the coast of Panama, and his dying words were that the drum should be returned to Buckland Abbey, and if there came times of trouble to the country, the drum should be beaten in order to recall him to rescue England. The drum was duly returned to Drake's house, and in the centuries following, there were several reports of the drum being heard. It was heard to beat, it is said, when the Mayflower launched from Plymouth in 1620. It was heard again when Admiral Nelson was made a free man of Plymouth. And it was also heard when Napoleon was brought into Plymouth Harbour as a prisoner. Other reported hearings include at the outbreak of World War I, before the Battle of Jutland, at the surrender of the Imperial German Navy in 1918, and also in 1940 during the Dunkirk evacuation. And this isn't the only legend about Drake and the house, because it is said that when he undertook the building, the conversion, it only took him 3 nights to complete because he invoked the assistance of the devil. As punishment for this demonic dabbling, Drake, it is said, has been condemned to drive a black hearse drawn by 4 headless horses across Dartmoor on moonless, windswept nights. The fearsome cortege is pursued by a spectral pack of baying hounds, their hellish screams carried upon the wild winds as they seek the souls of unbaptized infants. So another mention of spectral hounds on Dartmoor there. You can't help but wonder if all these legends link together in some way. And there are reports of some other paranormal activities at Buckland Abbey as well, which include sightings of monks walking the staircases, which were of course added a long time after they resided in the abbey. The monks are often supposedly seen in the Great Hall, which was once at the heart of the abbey and where the nave would have been. That makes sense, I guess. And there have also been reported sightings of a well-dressed woman resembling former resident Elizabeth Beatrice Drake, Lady Seaton, who uncovered and restored the Abbey's chapel during the 1920s. Now, a lady called Eleanor Hopkinson, who's one of the visitor managers at the Abbey, has also said there have been other reports of strange events thought to be linked to Lady Seaton. Flower petals have been seen on the top floor in the long gallery, and of course they were cleared up, but the petals kept reappearing even though there were no flower displays on the top floor. And Eleanor went on to say, "When I first started working here, I felt that the building was apprehensive of me. But after I've been here a while, it seemed to accept me. I think it knows we're here to look after it. There are strange things that happen here, but none of it feels malicious." You certainly get that sense when you walk around the place. It's an intriguing building. Very unusual design, of course, because of the nature of it being converted from an abbey. And some of the rooms were quite atmospheric, I found, particularly the kitchen and the chapel. So there we are. I hope you enjoyed that walk around Francis Drake's old place. Certainly an impressive house, I have to say. We've spent about an hour and a half here looking round, and we could spend more time, but it's closing up soon, so we're going to have to leave. There's also extensive gardens and grounds here that are open during the summer. Well worth a visit. Very interesting place to look at. And yeah, I think, as I always say, we're so lucky in the UK. You literally can't throw a stone without hitting a piece of history. And with that history comes a lot of legend, myth and lore, ghost stories, paranormal events, and so on and so on. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, if you're interested in weird fiction and sword and sorcery and horror and ghost stories, then please do check out our podcast, the Innsmouth Book Club, which goes out fortnightly and covers all aspects of weird fiction, from book and film to music and gaming and so on and so on. Okay, that's it for me from Devon this year. When we come back next year, who knows what else we may find. There's so much stuff down here. Of course, we've got the moors just over the way there. Perhaps we'll do an exploration of the moors next time. Yes, is that a distant howling I hear? See you soon.